Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. It's time, Sam, for our 2025 free agency preview. We're already to free agency.
Extravaganza? Free agency extravaganza?
I think the extravaganza is going to be the entire week, March 10th and beyond. That'll be an extravaganza week. This is just a preview for the extravaganza. And I don't want to, look, I want everybody to stay here. But it's not a great free agency class. But it doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. We're going to give you some options, how your team can improve, the positions where they can improve, some cut candidates. We're going to talk through all of that because remember, free agency is more than just this initial list, right? It actually gets worse. Let's be serious. It's more than this initial list. It's about who's getting franchise tagged. And as we always know, there's always surprise cuts. There's expected cuts. There's players added. There's trades. I think the trade market is going to be fascinating this offseason. We talked a little bit about that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We all look at the possible free agent class, and it's completely different because you're going to get a bunch of guys that get signed back to their teams, so they're not actually going to end up being free agents. And then you have the opposite, where you get a bunch of guys that are going to get cut, and they're not theoretically scheduled to be free agents, but they end up populating the free agent group as well. So it's a kind of forlorn exercise doing this, previewing a class that looks nothing like the one we're actually going to preview.
Well, either way, the list of players that we're going to go through, or these top players we're going to go through, decisions need to be made on them, whether it is their current team, whether it is franchise tagging, whether it is, them hitting the market. It all starts theoretically March 10th. That's Monday. So remember, old school free agency. The league year starts the second Wednesday of March, right? So we're all going to go to the NFL scouting combine in 2 weeks. That's going to go down. All the agents and teams are going to talk to each other. They're all going to pre-tamper before they can legally tamper. And then March 10th is the Monday where legal tampering starts and the official league year starts March 12th. That's the second Wednesday of March. That's when the contracts can be officially official. But for the last few years, it's essentially been that Monday, right? So that Monday through Wednesday, all the news essentially comes out. Every now and then you get that one guy that supposedly signs one place, and when it instead of becoming really official, it's right. You go somewhere else by Wednesday. But for the most part, Monday the 10th is the big day where we'll start hearing a lot of news. And I guess it gets earlier and earlier, Sam. Like, don't you hear rumblings like Saturday and Sunday somehow leading into Monday? Pre-tampering, tampering these days.
Tampering, pre-tampering, pre-tampering.
Yeah, so we'll be listening for all the dirt, in Indy in a couple weeks here, as the rumors start to swirl. So we'll go position by position, and just kind of give you some of the high level names, where the strengths and weaknesses are of the class. All right, ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, let's start with QBs, and there's one big name here, Sam. There's one huge name based off performance. There's other somewhat big names, but Sam Darnold, the prize of the QB free agent class. And then you also have
that a year ago.
I know, right? And you have the two Steelers with the two Steelers with Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. Shout out to Nagler in the house here. You're everywhere. Guys following us to breakfast nonstop, but here he is in the chat. So you got the two Steelers quarterbacks. You have Jameis Winston, who was the real star of Super Bowl week. Jalen Hurts, Cooper DeJean. Who was the star last week? No, it was Jameis Winston. From start to finish, Monday through Saturday, future media star Jameis Winston, also a free agent. He was asking around. He was asking all the Eagles and Chiefs players where he should sign. He was getting ready for free agency.
Yeah, and a few of them were answering, he should sign with Fox the way he's going about. I think they're right. Based off what we saw last week, I think Jameis's logical destination should absolutely be a Fox superstar, not trying to be a quarterback anymore.
So we're going to talk, I know we're going to get later, a little bit later, which players we might not want to really overpay for, whatever it might be. We discussed Sam Darnold yesterday, but some QB needy team is looking, and what teams are doing right now, they're stacking the draft, they're stacking free agency, and then there's probably a third list of tradable candidates, and the quarterback crop isn't looking great, right? So unless you love Tyler Shugg as like a second or third rounder from Louisville, or the second wave of quarterbacks, and you want to take a shot on one of those guys, you're really looking at the couple first rounders in Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, or you're thinking if you're the Giants or the Titans, the Raiders, the Jets, maybe bringing him back. All these teams are debating, is Sam Darnold, more than just a reclamation project? He's a good starter now.
Yeah, I mean Darnold. It feels like Darnold is a little bit like Cousins from a year ago, where he's the big domino that needs to fall in order for other things to kind of fit into place. Like there's a bunch of these quarterback needy teams. Obviously, free agency happens before the draft, so to an extent, it dictates what happens in the draft. Though this time a year ago, we would have said that ruled the Falcons out of the quarterback market because they signed Kirk Cousins, and then a month later, they're drafting Michael Penix Jr. at the top of the draft, which, given how Cousins went last year, turns out to have been a pretty important decision. But theoretically, like Darnold will rule a team out of the quarterback market based off where he signs and potentially rule other teams in. So he's the first big domino, I think, to fall. And the first part of that is the Vikings decision. Like, forget, where else he's going to land. It's like, where are they on Sam Darnold after the season that he just had, and such a weird thing because you said yesterday, like they've got options, right? This is not simply a binary, do you give him a monster contract, yes or no, flow chart. It's, well, okay, if no, do you franchise tag him? Like there's other options in addition to, do you hand him a monster contract?
Can we just really quick handle the news that came out today, supposedly about Trevor Lawrence? Can we just discuss this? Did you see the Trevor Lawrence trade rumors? Can we just debunk all of this really quick? So I don't even know where it started. It's ridiculous, and I'm sure I'll get asked about it later today from Pony and Mulsey on the Pittsburgh radio hit that the Pittsburgh Steelers have inquired, trade inquiry about Trevor Lawrence, who just signed before last offseason. And if he was traded by the Jags, who don't have a GM, by the way.
Right.
Don't have a GM at the moment. They're interviewing GMs.
GM.
They have an acting GM, yes. Ethan Baugh, acting GM. It's a $203 million cap hit, Sam, to trade or release Trevor Lawrence. Like, this is it. Just this needs to die, this rumor. It's not real. It's not happening. End it.
You're telling me that the report is not real.
So the report's interesting because we say this all the time. Every team's having every conversation, right? They're going to look up at all 53 players and probably have a conversation, other than like the Chiefs trading Mahomes and the Bills trading Josh Allen. The Chiefs are probably having this discussion about, would we trade Chris Jones? Do they want to? No, but there's like a 5% chance that they might do it. So they have the conversation. And so you could create a report that's like, Chiefs are having internal discussions. They might trade Chris Jones. Dallas is having internal discussions. They might trade Micah Parsons. Everything's being discussed, as it should be, right? You and I discuss. Sometimes what if we did 20-minute shows? It doesn't mean we're going to do it. What if we did 6-hour shows? Doesn't mean we're going to do it. We had those discussions, right? We're business planning, right? What do? That's not news. It's not news. And if the Steelers made this offhand call, which, by the way, they would know the implications of trading Trevor Lawrence and how unlikely that is. But if they made this offhand call, hey, is Trevor for sale? We don't have they probably called every day. Is Josh Allen for sale? Like, they could, but it's not news. It's not happening. So it doesn't need to be reported on. It's ridiculous.
I mean, the original report from somebody called Ryan Burr on Twitter that said the Steelers have made inquiries to the Jags about trading quarterback Trevor Lawrence. This is directly from the horse's mouth in the Jags organization. And then, wow, at the end of it. I mean, we said this yesterday, right? Like, you should call somebody up and offer an insulting offer because they might take it, right? What's the harm? I think it's plausible that the Steelers called the Jags and were like, you got a new regime in charge who are not, they're not the ones that drafted and or signed Trevor Lawrence to the long-term contract. What do you think? Would you move him? And presumably the Jags, because of what it would, like, independent of whether Liam Cohen likes Trevor Lawrence or not, just because of how painful it would be to get rid of him, we're like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, we're keeping him.
Yeah, you literally can't sign any other players this year with $203 million of cap, dead cap. Like, it's just not happening. Like, don't let it go viral. Don't even react to it. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
I mean,
end it.
Look, I think it's worth reporting on if the Steelers made the phone call. Like, it doesn't matter that it's not going to happen. It's worth I think, reporting that Pittsburgh called Jacksonville at least to inquire about Trevor Lawrence. I don't think that they would do it to, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. Like, they're not making that phone call. It's specifically because it's a new regime with a quarterback that hasn't necessarily lived up to number one overall billing, and they need a quarterback. So yeah, look, I have no problem with the report that it happened. Your problem should be with the people that haven't checked how plausible this could be for it to actually happen.
Yeah, where's old friend Brad Spielberger? I mean, he was kind of debunking all of it anyway. Same idea.
Right.
Guy just signed a whatever ridiculous contract just before last year. Like, sure, that's really going to happen. Anyway, back to Darnold.
Well, that was a worthwhile diversion.
I thought it was. We needed to, because we're talking about quarterbacks, and it's all connected, right? Draft, free agency, and then trades. And when we go to fixing every team in 5 minutes, we'll discuss the Steelers and what do they do, right? With both Fields and Wilson coming off a year where they went super cheap at the position, which again, if the goal is always a championship, but if the goal is maximizing your roster, it's not a bad strategy to do what the Steelers did last year, right? Pennies on the dollar for Russell Wilson and for Justin Fields. And theoretically it worked, right? You won 10 games. You certainly couldn't compete with the best teams in the AFC, but it worked as far as maximizing the roster for that year. But, it's not a great championship strategy, which is this quarterback draft class also probably not a great championship strategy. We're talking bridge quarterbacks, and that's what Sam Darnold was signed as last year. I called him the best bridge quarterback maybe in history. A 1-year, $10 million deal that turned into, an MVP caliber type of run from Darnold until the very end. So, any of these guys, you just take this, low money chance on. And Darnold's going to command some money, but Fields, Wilson, a Jameis, any team willing to give those guys a starting opportunity for low money as a bridge guy.
Yeah, I mean, Darnold, I think, is definitely he's the clear star, if you like, of this free agent group of quarterbacks. And as I said, the first domino that needs to fall. Once he goes somewhere, whether it's staying in Minnesota, whether it's moving on, whether it's a tag and trade type of deal and somebody acquires him, however it is, once the Darnold domino falls, then you're into the next wave, which is the sort of strict free agents like Russell Wilson, potential theoretical starters in free agency, either Wilson, Fields, does someone want to reclaim Daniel Jones, whatever. And then you've also got that specter of the guys that are not technically free agents, but are expected to be, which is Aaron Rodgers, probably the obvious name there. And then Kirk Cousins, based off what went down in Atlanta this year. I mean, I don't know if they're going to want to keep him around as an absurdly high paid backup. They could, they obviously carried both of them on the roster this year. Just because the order has flipped does not necessarily mean that you want to get rid of him. But I don't know that Kirk Cousins is the kind of guy that's going to handle tremendously well being the well-paid backup to the guy that just took his job. And, so Kirk Cousins could hit the open market as well. And whilst he's less of an attractive option than he was a year ago, because we've seen what it looks like with him coming back off that Achilles injury, even if he takes a step, it's a much sort of, the negative is much more obvious than it was a year ago because now it's a proven commodity as opposed to, theoretically, he might be okay. But he's an option that isn't technically a free agent yet, but probably will be.
Yeah. I see Cousins getting moved. Absolutely. As Falcons, they're going to have to try to move on from him. They also, I believe it's the second fewest draft picks with Kirk Cousins cost them a pick last year. When he admitted to tampering, they traded for Matthew Judon, so they lost out on some draft picks heading into this year. So they'll try to recoup the draft pick that Kirk Cousins lost them last year for tampering with Darnell Mooney. So yeah, I do expect that to happen. So again, the teams like the Browns, Giants, Titans, Raiders, Jets, all these teams that need to figure out quarterback, Cousins could be their bridge quarterback for right now. Anything else on the QB free agent class? It's not great.
Not unless we're talking backup options.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always say I'd give Jameis a shot. I could now, the Steelers have this history of this guy played well against, a lot of teams do. This guy played well against us.
Yeah.
Let's sign him. Jameis to the Steelers? I think Tomlin could,
I mean,
says, hey, I could get them. The snow game, the snow upset.
at some point during the week of the Super Bowl, Jameis uttered the line that you always utter, which is he's one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL. It's probably still true. I mean,
I think so.
clearly
Yeah.
he has problems in that every now and again he's just going to go YOLO and throw you 4 interceptions. But he probably is one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL. And if you don't have any starter, if you don't have any guy that you're confident in, I mean, at the very minimum, Jameis as an option, as a competition to whoever else you want to bring in, kind of makes sense.
And, again, I'll repeat, the difference is, signing QB 26 to 32 is not appealing, not enticing, not a recipe for, championship success. You could get into a good 9 or 10 win season if things go right and the rest of the roster is good, but it's not like any other position where, player 26 to 32 at his position's extremely valuable. He's a starter and he's going to contribute. So let's go running back here. Kind of a weak class, but it coincides with a great class when it comes to the draft, right? So I think this is in this rejuvenation of the running back position and Barkley and Henry and free agent signings that did help their teams. We're not going to see this big like market reset. Aaron Jones, top guy on the 33rd board right now at 34. Najee Harris at 62 overall. J.K. Dobbins at 66. Nick Chubb, technically, could be out there for the Browns and coming off of multiple injuries. When he's healthy, obviously he's great. We're starting to get up in age though, and he'll be an interesting name to watch. But I don't think we see Aaron Jones like resetting the market just because of Barkley, Henry, Josh Jacobs. I think a lot of teams are going to say, yeah, second, third round, we're gonna get a running back this year.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it would be really interesting as a test case if there were some big names, like high impact running backs that suddenly came available in this season following the success of Saquon and Derrick Henry. So we get to test that idea, right? Would we see this immediate market adjustment and a ton of money getting sunk into the position? We're not really getting that. Aaron Jones is a good running back. He's an important running back for whichever offense he's in, both Packers and Vikings, when he's healthy. He is, however, 31 years old. He's, had some injury history. Like, you're just not sinking big time money into him. Similar, like Najee Harris was a first-round draft pick, but he's consistently sort of demonstrated that he is a prisoner of the offense that he's in. Like, if you don't have a really good run blocking unit, Najee Harris is probably not, dramatically improving the situation just by his presence. So, like, unless you're adding him to an offense like the Eagles or like the Lions with an offensive line that's dominant, like, he's just not worth investing in significant money. And then after those two guys, you're kind of down to, guys that have flashed or shown little bits and pieces, or running back reclamation projects. Like, we talk about that for quarterbacks, but like Javonte Williams was somebody that everyone loved at draft time, had a knee injury, has never really done it for Denver, but he's 25 years old. Like, maybe teams do want to try and see if Javonte still has that ability. Or, as you said, Nick Chubb, the best running back in the NFL for a period, who then had this devastating knee injury and didn't look like quite the same player coming back the first year off that, but maybe he will be the year after that. Like, it's definitely not, it's not a marquee group of free agents.
I like the idea of the reclamation project at running back, right? Austin Eckler a couple of years ago, signing, fairly cheap deals. I think that's a good way to go. The NFL mock draft database.com, that's what I generally reference as far as the consensus draft board. I mentioned the deep class currently has 7 running backs in the top 100, just over 100. Ollie Gordon, RJ Harvey in the top 135. I mean, you're talking 7 to 10 running backs, and some of the players in the 130s to 150s currently on that consensus board, players a lot of people like. DJ Giddens and Rashard Smith and Devin Neal, these, Kansas, Giddens from Kansas State, Rashard Smith from SMU, wide receiver conversion, Devin Neal from Kansas. Like, there's names in the 150s and 160s on the current consensus board that I know a lot of draft analysts really like. I mean, it could be a year. Remember, the Jets doubled up at running back last year. Teams that are running back needy, it's probably a year to maybe double up in the draft and just say, okay, we're not going to, we're done with running backs for a couple of years from a team building perspective, and that's probably the way to go rather than spending a ton of money elsewhere.
The other name worth bringing up, by the way, like J.K. Dobbins is still only 27 years old. He's had every significant leg injury it's possible to have for a running back, and somehow still comes back. I think he should have won Comeback Player of the Year over like the box that the awards put themselves in with the definitions that basically made it turned it into Joe Burrow. So I can't remember if we said this on the show or not, but like, because there's no real direction to a lot of these awards, there's a significant cohort of the 50 voters who are of the opinion that Comeback Player of the Year effectively should go to the best player who experienced some form of comeback.
As you described that well. You described that well. Yeah, go ahead. Finish it.
As opposed to the player who had the largest comeback, like the greatest magnitude of comeback, which to me is quite obviously what the award is trying to give, trying to achieve, trying to reward. And in that situation, like J.K. Dobbins coming back from that litany of leg injuries is clearly a greater magnitude of comeback than Joe Burrow returning to play after a wrist injury that nobody ever really suspected would cause him to not come back from it. You know what I mean? Like J.K. Dobbins has experienced injuries that could or maybe should have ended his career effectively at this level. Whereas Joe Burrow is like, okay, he's hurt, he's missing the rest of the year, but next year he'll be back and he'll be Joe Burrow again. So to me, J.K. Dobbins should have been Comeback Player of the Year. And aside from anything else, was clearly a difference maker in that Chargers offense when he was healthy. So for a guy that's still only 27 years old that has shown that kind of resilience and fighting spirit, I mean, if I had a running back committee that had a space available, I'd certainly still be interested in bringing Dobbins in.
So is he our new Jason Verrett? Jason Verrett was a free agent for about 9 straight years. And we've been doing this over 10 years. For about 9 straight years, you and I like, hey, I'll take a 1-year flyer on Jason Verrett. And then he got hurt in like 7 or 8 of those years. But there was the 1 year. He was fine. New Jason Verrett. Always take a chance on the oft-injured player on a 1-year deal.
Yeah, I mean, Verrett was such a roll of the dice. Like, well, if he stays healthy 1 year, maybe I'll get a really good corner out of him. Dobbins is explosive. Like, even now, with all those injuries in his history, he was still a breakaway threat for this Chargers offense, and they didn't really have one outside of him. So, yeah, like it's obviously a bigger gamble than players that don't have several significant leg injuries in their history. But again, if you have a committee, like if you don't have a bell cow running back, or maybe if you do and you just want a backup, like Dobbins would definitely be a guy that I'd be kicking the tires on. I mean, he was getting paid basically nothing last year because of all those injuries, and yet showed that he can be a difference maker still. So yeah, maybe he's a little bit on the Jason Verrett spectrum of like, what are the chances he stays healthy based off his history? But man, I just want to reward a guy with that kind of history to his game, like that kind of comeback story.
All right, Sam, let's go to the pass catchers. Biggest name in free agency is always it's going to be T. Higgins, obviously. Bengals still have a decision to make as far as franchise tag, re-signing him, figuring out what they want to do there. But if we add up receivers and tight ends, it's not a great tight end class either. I think Mike Gesicki, another Bengal, is interesting. He had a nice season this year, but it's mostly receivers. But it's a lot of receivers who, again, this is tricky when you're analyzing the NFL, separating the name from what they are right now. T. Higgins is in his prime. But if we look at the other big names, Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, all of those guys are huge names, once number one-ish type of players. Godwin, 1/2, whatever you want to call them, but they're not the same players. Godwin coming off of a big injury. Amari Cooper was just brought into Buffalo to, rejuvenate their passing attack. He wasn't a huge part of what they did. Stephon Diggs, power move by the Texans this offseason. Played pretty well, wasn't great, then gets hurt. DeAndre Hopkins, big move by the Chiefs to bring him in. Wasn't a big part of what they did. Had 1 or 2 games where he made a significant impact. So it is a whole bunch of retread, former ones. And for receiver, Sam, this isn't the position where you tend to dip and then come back, right? It's not a position where it's like, oh man, we thought this guy had lost it Now all of a sudden it's like, turn back the clock 8 years. So this is to me, it's a buyer beware type of free agent receiver class.
Yeah, I mean, Higgins is the only guy still clearly in their prime who doesn't have, some significant question marks. Like Godwin is still, I think, in his prime, but the dude has had a couple of nasty injuries in the last couple of years. So that's obviously his question mark. Higgins is the cleanest available option. He's in his prime. He doesn't have a massive injury history, though he does have some that maybe people overlook a little bit.
He's missed a lot of time.
Yeah. So like, it's not like but he hasn't had a knee blown apart the way, other of these wide receivers have. And he's young enough that we're not concerned by that, like dropping off or anything. So he's, again, like, it's a bit like the quarterback position. He's the obvious star, the obvious prize to be had with this free agent group. With Higgins, obviously, though, the big thing is I don't know that I've seen too many times a quarterback exerting that kind of pressure on the organization to keep a different player in the building, right? Like Joe Burrow has been incredibly consistent and vocal about wanting to keep T. Higgins around, right? And I mean, look,
did you see him with Big Cat, by the way? He was on with Big Cat. He was on with Big Cat explaining contract restructures and like how they would do it, right? It was more than like, hey, Mike Brown, bring these guys back. He's like, all right, we'll restructure the deals and we'll push money to forward. We'll add void years. I mean, he was doing a whole bunch of stuff, which, by the way, Cincinnati doesn't do historically. Right. He was really pushing. He was playing Howie in Philly and encouraging Cincinnati to start playing that game, which was pay the cash up front and push the cap and, make it all work.
Which is interesting for a couple of reasons, right? Number one, again, as we said, I don't remember it too many times where a quarterback has put that kind of pressure on their organization publicly. Number two, Burrow's contract has already sort of forced Cincinnati to start doing some things that they don't normally do, right? He has already like broken rules that the Bengals have typically had in terms of how they handle their contracts. Like his deal is the type of deal that they don't sign previously. So they've already sort of made exceptions, or at least whether it's made exceptions or they've started to modernize, like they've started to act the way the rest of the NFL does, because Burrow is so special. They've like, okay, this is the guy. We will do it because Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. So if he was able to make them do that for his own contract, is he able to make them do that for, to keep T. Higgins in the building, to go in a different direction than they would normally do? Either way, that whole dynamic is incredibly interesting to me because Burrow is not the guy making that decision, but it would be a hell of a statement to just say, okay, not only has he come out consistently like appealing for us to make this decision, he's been so adamant about it that he's like shown a blueprint of how we could do it financially, publicly. Again, like he's been on shows showing this is how we can make this work financially. For us to then turn around and go, yeah, no, we're going to go in a different direction. We're just going to let him walk. I mean, it would be a hell of a statement.
But if they keep Chase and Trey Hendrickson, say, I mean, that's going to be the challenge for the Bengals. Chase is due his payday. Hendrickson needs a payday. He's still in the middle of his prime. And if they let Higgins walk or they try to tag him, and I don't know how much that upsets Higgins. If they let Higgins walk essentially and they don't sign him long term, I think that's still doable. I mean, it's still that I don't think that's insulting necessarily. Like 2 out of the big 3, and then you figure out how to stitch together wide receiver 2. But yeah, I think it's still tough for Cincinnati to keep everybody, without a defense that needs to be overhauled. New scheme. Jermaine Pratt asking for a trade right now yesterday for the Bengals. I mean, they've got a lot of work to do beyond just the stars.
I mean, maybe they're doing this internally, but it would be interesting, if the Bengals went to Joe Burrow and said, okay, look, we can keep one of T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. Pick, like, which one do you want to keep on this roster more? Because we can't financially make it happen to keep both of them without sacrificing here, there, and everywhere, right? And make that case to him. Like, that would be interesting if you pitched it to him that way and said, we can keep T. Higgins, but it means we have to lose Trey Hendrickson, or we can keep the best defensive player we have and figure out another direction for wide receiver 2. Whether it's the guys that are already on the roster, like Yossi Vass, or whether we draft another guy. That would be fascinating. But if it's literally just like Burrow's out here campaigning to keep everyone. The Bengals are just like, yeah, nah, we're gonna stay cheap. We're gonna get younger and cheaper always, right? We're not gonna break our rules. We're gonna go in a new direction. We let Jesse Bates walk. We're gonna do the same thing for T Higgins. Like if they just did that without caring that Burrow's out here campaigning to keep everyone, I'm not saying it would like break down the relationship or anything, but it wouldn't be good.
I think the Bengals have already made moves that are Joe Burrow led, right? I mean, they built an indoor practice facility. Like they've already done stuff that they didn't do for years. So, when we're driving down 71, there's a nice bubble that they could practice in now. They never had that before. Been through the stadium. They've redone the locker room and everything underneath. I mean, they feel like little things, but for a Cincinnati team that hadn't done that for years, I think Burrow's been the driver there. So it'll be interesting to see how much he is a driver for their team building strategy. Because, oh, by the way, they have an offensive line that needs to be sorted as well, right? There's other places that need help, again, besides just the stars in Cincinnati. Either way, Higgins, if he hits the market, every team that needs a 1 or that wants to be aggressive and needs a 2, or already has a great player and wants to pair him with T. Higgins, I think they're all in the market for T. Higgins. Some of the other interesting names to me, Darius Slayton out there. He's been a pretty good deep threat throughout his career, but again, just Keenan Allen. I mean, we're starting to get down here. The free agent class, once again, not great. You're not in. You don't want to. Do you want to pay a Darius Slayton like $10 or $12 million a year? I think that's where the influx of receivers from college football over the last couple of years through the draft. There's a lot of names that are probably going to get paid a ton over the next couple of years, but like getting your receivers through the draft has been a pretty good move. And that's why this class, I don't know who you end up paying here. Keenan Allen, another one of those former big names, uneven year this year with Chicago, pretty good possession guy still, but I don't think he's going to be a game changer at this point in his career.
No, like there's definitely some interesting names out there to fill out a receiving core. Like, you could bring, I mean, look at the touchdown machine that Nick Westbrook-Akina was this year in Tennessee. He's only 28 years old. Like he's an interesting component of a wide receiver core, but obviously he's not your number 1, probably not your number 2. Greg Dortch is a fascinating, like dynamic slot weapon that can come in and be, that player for a team. But T. Higgins is the one guy out there that you would have like reasonable confidence in being a number 1 if that was the hole on your depth chart. For T. Higgins, for a second, where do you think he should land in terms of the contract he gets? Because he's, again, like the one big name, the one big star, the one guy that could theoretically fill that number 1 receiver role. But he's not like, I mean, nobody's ever going to confuse T. Higgins for Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, like A.J. Brown, like the superstars. But does the market put his deal into that kind of category?
Probably where Ayuk landed, 30 per year. Because you have Justin Jefferson at 35, CeeDee Lamb at 34, A.J. Brown at 32, Amon-Ra St. Brown just over 30, Tyreek's at 30, but, he's 31. That was groundbreaking at the time. Ayuk landed at 30, and you would say he's a 1/2, right? You'd have you came in with a similar question. How much is he a product of Shanahan? But oh, by the way, he's a really good route runner. He could still win on his own. He's probably a 1 for most teams. I think that's where Higgins is, right? He's been in this place where he's been the 2 for the Bengals, but when Chase got hurt a couple years ago, he kind of took over. You're right, though. The missed games are an issue for Higgins. He's missed a lot of time over the last couple of years, but I think that's where it is. Jalen Waddle's at 28, probably the 28 to 30 range. And then
Waddle,
higher cap, desperate team, maybe it lands at 30. If you're New England or whatever, and you have to drag people up to New England nowadays because the roster's terrible, you might have to pay 32 or 33, and it feels like an overpay, but you have to do it.
Yeah, I think Waddle is probably a better comp. I think Ayuk is a significantly better receiver than we've seen from T. Higgins so far. Waddle might make sense in terms of being the second guy.
I wouldn't say significantly better. I think they're comparable, man.
I think he's been significantly better. He's way more dynamic. He's more explosive. You've got the question mark of how much of it is a product of the Shanahan offense, but like, I think he can do a lot more than T. Higgins can. But that's, again, the problem with That's the problem with trying to keep him in Cincinnati, right? Is that, yeah, theoretically, like you're going to have to pay Chase. Chase's deal is going to have to look like Jefferson's, which is $35 million a year, market resetting, right? Like he's going to have to be essentially the best paid wide receiver in the NFL. So that deal's coming. Then you've got, okay, so if we're stuck with that for Chase, we don't want to be paying T. Higgins more than, whatever, $25 million a year. But the market, because he's the only prize out there, is probably going to have to push him above 30 million just because there are other teams out there that will pay that. So now, if you want to keep him, you either have to go to crazy money for two wide receivers, or you have to convince T. Higgins to take like a $7 million a year haircut to stay in the building, which, I mean, maybe, but feels unlikely.
Yeah, I mean Chase will at least be up in Jefferson range plus, right? At this point.
Yeah.
That's why it's tough to keep both. That's why it's difficult to keep both in Cincinnati. Anywhere else or anything else on the receiver pass catcher position here?
What about again the players that are not the non guys on the list that may end up as available? So the Devontae Adams is of the world.
I mean, is Devontae just tied to Rodgers? I mean, I think he's 33. I think there's still something left in Adams' game. It's funny because you can look at age and just say, well, this guy's 30 or this guy's 33. Don't you have more faith in what Devontae Adams can do at this point than, say, DeAndre Hopkins? Two guys that were maybe the top two receivers in the NFL at any given stretch 6-7 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago even. Don't you feel a little bit better about what Adams can bring to the table, the way he played? I mean, I thought he played well with the Raiders and had uneven quarterback play.
Yeah.
And when Rodgers finally started playing better statistically, it coincided with Devontae Adams, in the second half of the season. I think he could still play.
Adams still looks good. Yeah, like I'm okay. His age, you're sort of concerned in terms of how long that's going to last. But yeah, he can absolutely still cook right now. Like obviously Deebo Samuel has already asked for a trade. Like he's potentially available out there in the trade market. DK Metcalf is a guy that's been talked about as potentially being moved in Seattle for a while now. I wonder if he would be available for teams.
I think more realistically, they're going to cut. We'll talk about cut candidates. Tyler Lockett is high. I think it ends up being DK and JSN staying in Seattle. But yeah, I mean, look, if there's rumors about Trevor Lawrence calls, I would call about DK. I would make that phone call, at least to Seattle, call John Schneider.
Yeah, like there's a couple of names out there which, would be interesting at wide receiver. They're not theoretically free agents.
I think that's the bottom line for this offseason, which is like Chris Godwin coming off of an injury. I put him in that Adam Thielen, and I always make this first year Andrew Luck, Reggie Wayne connection. He could be this really nice possession receiver later in his career, maybe help a young quarterback along. He might be a nice 2 for Jaden Daniels opposite Terry McLaurin, for Drake May in New England, whatever it might be. But I believe the offseason, the story here is going to be the trades at the receiver position. As far as, building the receiving core, I think there's trade potential. I think there'll be a lot of rumors, but I think that's where a lot of the big news is going to come out more so than the free agent class.
And then the other one is whether any team can convince the Jets to part with Garrett Wilson, who apparently is looking to get out, right? Like if that's something he can force, and like, Garrett Wilson would immediately become by far the prize, I think, of this free agent.
Oh yeah,
this offseason, right? If you could actually convince the Jets to part ways with Garrett Wilson for a first-round draft pick and whatever, that's a way a team can fix a receiving core.
And then you're probably going to have to pay him $30 million soon.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's worth 30, but again, supply and demand, I think, I'd make that call as well. See how much they are looking to reset. So interesting group of pass catchers on paper, some older names plus T. Higgins, but I think the trade market is going to be rich. We'll hear a lot of stuff going on here. Let's go to offensive line here. So we're just kind of stacking them all up together. We've talked about Trey Smith being the biggest name coming off the Super Bowl loss for the Kansas City Chiefs. Right guard, had a really nice 4-year career for them so far. And clearly, I think the top guard, Ronnie Stanley, out there, number 7 on the 33rd team free agent list. And then Zach Martin, technically looking at free agency here, right? For the Cowboys. Maybe mulling retirement and what he wants to do.
Yeah, and even if he isn't, I mean, Zach Martin looks like he's well on the downslope of his career at this stage. I mean, Hall of Fame caliber offensive lineman, but it seems like age has caught up to him fairly significantly at this point.
Probably his last two worst seasons, the last couple of years after nonstop elite play for 7 or
Yeah.
8 years.
Yeah, like he's just hitting that decline at this stage. So I'm not. I mean, maybe depending on how bad the hole is you're trying to fill, you could get by with him for a year, but it's not. It's definitely not an option that I would be desperately chasing at this point.
So the other names to mention here, as far as tackles go, left tackles in particular, guys that are not at the very end of their career, Ronnie Stanley, who we say is at 7, Cam Robinson as well, right? The Vikings traded for him midseason from the Jags. Cam Robinson, he was a guy that we thought was a little overhyped maybe early in his career, but he's turned into a pretty solid pass protector. Free agency, by the way, is the time when I really use the word solid, right? We're just going to say solid, hundreds of times here between now and when free agency is happening. Solid pass protector, though, right? And I think that potentially gets paid. We've talked about the Chiefs, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Chiefs later, solving and maybe locking up a left tackle. I think both of those guys might be in play for Kansas City. Teams that are just, I think Washington, I don't know if they want to go in with Brandon Coleman, third rounder this past year as their future left tackle. They're going to be in this left tackle market, I believe. New England needs like 4 offensive linemen. So I think Stanley and Cam Robinson get paid. And then you have every year, remember when we were doing our free agent rankings for years, Sam, we would always have to weigh, how do you weigh the long-term option versus the short-term option? How do you rank these guys in one linear list? So every year I would say Morgan Moses is still out there, right? He's a 1-year guy that could come in and solidify right tackle. Kevin Zeitler is going to be that guy. When we're fixing every team in 5 minutes, the Lions made that move last year for him to come in and, play right guard. QB, offensive line needy teams, you can pick up these 1-year stopgaps while you're trying to fix everything else. Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses, 2 of those guys. Again, Tyron Smith at left tackle as well.
Yeah, Cam Robinson is an interesting one because he kind of rescued the Viking season. I mean, they lost Christian Darrisaw, one of the best left tackles in the NFL. The drop-off from Darrisaw to the next option at left tackle would have been horrific for the Vikings. And instead, they go and trade for Cam Robinson. Now, it's costly. They basically don't have any draft picks left anymore because of the moves they had to make. But, I mean, he came in and that offense was able to keep ticking with very little drop-off. Like, Robinson was nowhere near as good as Darrisaw, but it's the difference between elite and fine at left tackle, which is a much smaller difference than the difference between fine and catastrophe, even if, the relative gap between those two is the same. So Robinson's definitely an interesting option for a team. Again, if you don't have a left tackle, right? If you're needy, Kansas City, and, you don't want to trust a draft pick again because you haven't been able to find one, maybe Robinson would be an interesting stopgap. Ronnie Stanley is interesting because at his best, he was arguably the best pass blocking left tackle in the game, but he had that awful ankle injury, which basically cost him 2 years. Like he went down initially, came back, and was clearly not ready to come back. Like played like a game, was so bad in that game, they basically shut him down for the next year as well. And so, and then came back and has been good, but not where he was before he had that injury. So where he's going to land in terms of level, like playing ability going forward, I think is an interesting question. I don't know that we have a firm handle on exactly what he's going to be going forward. And then the one name that I'd be interested in. So, we talk about the stars, you talk about kind of depth options or whatever, and then all these reclamation projects. What about a reclamation project at tackle? Guys come out in the draft, they're college left or right tackles, and a lot of the times the NFL immediately is moving them to the other side. This is where the space is, this is where you're going to play. And then rarely do you see guys move later in their career, right? And I generally don't think it's a good idea. But Jedrick Wills was a college right tackle who was moved immediately to the left side by the Browns, has been pretty bad for the majority of his career to the point where they're moving on from him, has gotten worse during his career, has yet to play a single snap at right tackle. I don't know if that's the reason, right? I don't know if playing at right tackle is going to do anything to fix him. But if I'm an NFL team with a right tackle problem, I'd be interested in finding out, right? Let's bring in Jedrick Wills, who's still
Yeah.
only like 26 or whatever, and let's find out if he plays better at right tackle than he has at left tackle.
I thought that might be where you were going as you were breaking that down. By the way, in that same draft class, Mekhi Becton was drafted at 11, and he was just signed by the Eagles as a reclamation project. Pennies on the dollar to just put him at right guard.
Right.
And that paid dividends for them. They stole a starting right guard who was good. It was good for their Super Bowl run there. I kind of like that. And remember, I cite this all the time, right? Years 3 through 5, I think, are the biggest ones for offensive linemen starting to see their improvement. Off the top of my head, Cam Robinson had a bit of that, right? Where year 3, you just started to see this incline. Donovan Smith got better as the years went on, and then settled in as solid, as a solid starter. We haven't seen the trajectory yet from Jedrick Wills, but I love that. I mean, if you get him on the cheap, and he could be a good guy there. I like that. Brandon Scherf's the other name I just wanted to mention as the older guard, the 1 year stopgap that could, in this world of creeping back toward average, as we always say on the offensive line. Scherf, there's points in Jacksonville where Scherf was the best offensive lineman for them. But like I said, last year with the Lions, Kevin Zeitler was the worst of their 5, right? So if you have these other pieces in place and you just want to make sure you don't have a massive hole on the offensive line, the Brandon Scherfs, Kevin Zeitlers, Morgan Moses's of the world, those are the guys I bring in for like the 1 year just to solidify things. It's not a great future-proofing type of exercise, but it gives you time to maybe draft a guy, let them develop, and make sure you just make sure you go into the draft without a massive need, right? It is one of the biggest things that we preach here all the time. You cannot go into the draft saying, I need a tackle, I need a safety, I need a corner, and then draft according to those needs. Those are the types of players that I'm mentioning here that help solidify things along the way, so you don't have to make those moves. I like the Wills call, though, of developmental tackle.
Yeah, there's some interesting names in this free agent group for offensive linemen. You've also got DJ Humphries, who's like 32 years old, I think. Obviously was coming back, like didn't get signed essentially this offseason because he was coming back off. It was an ACL injury for him. So teams knew he wasn't going to be ready to go like at the start of the season. Came back later on. Kansas City signed him. It looked bad when he was out there, but who knows if that's the injury still, right? Like how much of DJ Humphries' performance this year was just rustiness coming back off that injury and he's not 100% yet. Like, what does he look like in 2025 with a full offseason of theoretically getting healthy and getting back to 100% fitness and just physical condition? Again, not a guy you'd necessarily want to be pinning your hopes to, but if you did have that problem spot at left tackle, let's say post-draft, maybe Humphries is a guy that could come in and actually open some eyes in training camp and win a starting job that you weren't necessarily expecting. At center, Ryan Kelly is a free agent. That's a pretty big name for the interior spot and a guy that can come in and be a good quality starter for somebody.
I'll mention 2 more. Drew Dahlman, center from the Falcons, played solid football the last couple of years. Tevin Jenkins from the Bears. The Bears offensive line got trashed a lot with Justin Fields and Caleb Williams at quarterback the last couple of years. I thought Jenkins was one of their more consistent performers when out there and healthy. So
the last name.
I don't hate this class. I think, again, teams that when you have massive offensive line issues, you go to the second wave here. Some teams will have to pay a lot of money for a Ronnie Stanley or Cam Robinson, but you get this second wave, pick up 2 or 3 starters if that's what you need, and then get to the draft by, without having a massive need on the offensive line. Go ahead.
The last name that I would mention is Alaric Jackson for the Rams left tackle. Like Jackson was sort of, project developmental tackle. When he got into the starting lineup, he was sort of, number one, he was getting his ass kicked. Number 2, he was sort of held up as like the poster child for the problems with the Rams offensive line in a post Andrew Whitworth world. But last season, he was pretty good. Like Jackson's improved and developed throughout his time starting for the Rams, like back-to-back seasons essentially with 1,000 snaps as effectively the every down starter. And last year, I think it was actually pretty good at both run blocking and pass protecting. So Alaric Jackson is somebody that all of a sudden becomes quite an intriguing name. I think, again, if you have that problem spot at left tackle, the guy's only 26 years old. In the last 2 seasons combined, he's given up 4 total sacks, according to PFF. His pass blocking efficiency number has gone up. His, pass protecting grade has gone up. His overall pressure total has gone
Come
down.
back.
If you do
Come
need
on.
a left tackle, Alaric Jackson might be an answer. Problems with the camera, Steve?
It just came back. We'll give it one more shot here, or I'm going to pivot to the laptop. Let me move this thing over. There we go. We were doing so well with the new plug. All right, let's move on to defensive line. Distracted here. Khalil Mack, Josh Sweat, Osa Odigizua, Milton Williams, the interior offensive line, the interior pass rushers, those guys are going to get paid. Milton Williams, Osa Odigizua, Khalil Mack, I think he could still play, Sam. I thought there was a point in his career where it looked like he had lost a step and wasn't as effective. I think he's been a little, he's still solid out there. He's still rejuvenated. And Josh Sweat, had a couple, 2.5 NFL sacks, 3 sacks total in the Super Bowl, probably made himself some money. And like I said yesterday about the defensive line class in the draft, I think the story of this offseason's on the defensive line is going to be like, hey, we got to win with 4, the whole deal. So these guys are going to be valued.
Yeah, actually, this is a pretty strong part of the free agent group, I guess. It's not, again, it's not a vintage free agent class, but the defensive line's actually got some options. Maybe again, like, are we just conditioned to this world of like a decade ago where like legitimate high end top 5 players at their position hit free agency on a fairly regular basis and they were the prize every offseason? I don't know if we've just reached a stage now where that just doesn't happen. Like teams don't let those guys hit the market anymore. They're better at keeping them in the building. They're not, most teams are not so squeezed in terms of cap flexibility that they can't keep a guy that they want in their building. So that just doesn't happen as much. But there are some players like so my point is none of them are that 26-year-old second contract looking for the second contract guy that's going to get market resetting money and be the clear superstar of free agency. But there are still some very good players, I think, that particularly in a league where D-line rotation is everything, that you can find somebody to come in, be part of your front, your sort of 7 defensive linemen that are going to get significant snaps and be a very useful player.
Yeah, that's why Milton Williams. You remember a couple of years ago, Javon Hargrave hit free agency again. Coming from Philly, hit free agency at like a decent age, right? And so most of free agency is like here's a bunch of guys, late 20s and into their 30s. Oh, look, there's a 26-year-old. That's Milton Williams with the Eagles this year in a league, as we talked a little bit about yesterday. They hit this really bad lull with interior defensive linemen coming out of the draft for a couple of years. I think the market has skyrocketed for that position generally, and there's not a whole lot of supply when it comes to interior pass rushes. Osa Odigizua, Milton Williams, I think both of those guys have a chance to make a ton of money this offseason, and they're not like huge names around the NFL, right? This isn't. Remember the 2019 class when all of those guys signed their big deals? That's Dexter Lawrence and Jeffrey Simmons and Christian Wilkins and Ed Oliver. That's all those guys, right? They're all big names. Milton Williams and Osa Odigizua might command that type of money because they can rush the passer. Now, this also does coincide with, we talked again yesterday, Daniel Jeremiah saying, hey, he's got 24 starting interior defensive linemen versus 12 last year. There's 24 defensive linemen in the top 100 of the consensus board. I think this is a decent free agent class, a potentially really good to great draft class, and just a good year overall to reshape the defensive line.
Yeah, it is. Both those guys. So you're right. They're kind of a little bit under the radar, a little bit lesser known than some other defense tackles. On the other hand, they both had pretty good sack seasons, which is usually an indicator that like the NFL will see them in favorable light. Neither of them hit double digits like the Matabuike season from a year ago, but I think they were 7 and 8 or 8 and 7 respectively. So they shouldn't be exactly completely under the radar.
Yeah. So look, I think a guy like Sweat. I mean, it's tough to like compare Khalil Mack and Josh Sweat. Sweat's also heading into the prime of his career, and Khalil Mack is a little bit toward the end. I don't know what you end up paying for Khalil Mack, but he's the top guy right now at 6 on 33rd. Josh Sweat is right there, but I think Sweat has a chance to maybe make the most money of anybody if he gets out of Philadelphia.
How concerned would you be about signing a defensive lineman coming off that Philadelphia defense just because the strength of that group is the unit, right? It's like, okay, Milton Williams had a pretty good pass rushing year. On the other hand, look what's around him, right? Like how much of that was ensuring that the double team always went to Jalen Carter, was, everyone else is commanding attention as well. Same thing for Sweat. Like Sweat had a really good year, but how much of that is Josh Sweat is typically not going to get double team attention from anyone. And if you suddenly sign him to be like a big time pass rusher, the prize of free agency, the attention is going to swing in his direction a lot more.
My concern with Sweat generally is I think he's always been good, not great. I don't think he's a great pass rusher. I think he's good. I think he's a good run defender. I think he's solid, Sam. And the supply and demand on this one in the free agent market, maybe like again, teams that really want to reshape the defensive line could say, well, we'll pay big bucks for one guy and we could draft two, in the first 3 rounds and feel really good about changing up front. I don't know if I want to pay Sweat a ton of money. Milton Williams is the type of guy, or a Diggy Zua, that I loved as underrated and would love to have on my team as a complimentary pass rusher. But
Right.
that was when I thought I could get him for 10 to 12, 15. I think that gets pushed to 20. I really do. I mean, I think that's where the market's gone at that position. So if for some reason teams don't want to pay that and I could get them for 12 to 14 million, which might seem like a slap in the face, I don't know, compared to others, then I feel better about that. So I think they're all good, not great. And I don't want to pay great type of money. Whereas again, that 2019 interior defensive line class, I think all of them deserve to get paid what they got paid. Lawrence, Simmons, Oliver, Wilkins, all those guys. I think they're better overall players. Where I think Williams was like a tweener coming out, edge, interior. He's become a very good player, but I don't know if I want to pay the huge money for those types of guys.
But this is kind of back to like, again, there's so much camp space out there. Like we talked about this yesterday, right? The things you're interested in seeing, the money's got to go somewhere. So, you know, if, okay, the top 2 camp teams in the NFL, the Patriots and the Raiders, they're potentially not in this market, but the Cardinals, for example, right? They're a team whose defensive line read like a preseason game, right? When you're looking at the bodies that they're putting out there, the Cardinals could be interested in a player like that. They have the space. So, yeah, sure, theoretically, you don't want to be paying Milton Williams or a Diggy Zua $25 million a year. On the other hand, you have the money to spend, and that's like that. Those are the free agents available this year. So you might just end up paying that. Like suddenly Milton Williams is getting Jeffrey Simmons money, and you're like, yeah, obviously that doesn't make sense in isolation, but from a market standpoint, it might.
Other names to watch here. One of my second tier players that I would keep an eye on, Levi Onwuzurike from the Lions. You told me there was some new pronunciation on that.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is though. Now it's
during
like,
the playoffs. I'm going with
yeah.
Onwuzurike. Who else? Dante Fowler had an interesting season. I still think he's kind of a rotational guy. And then Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck is a free agent. And so I don't know why he's not on top of the list here.
Right, it's true. The Barbarian. Anytime the Barbarian hits free agency, you got to start throwing the bag at him.
You also have the interesting names like Calais Campbell, who's pushing 40, and every year was he's still good. Every year could be his last year, but as the 1 year player, remember we've done this for years. Like, hey, one more year of Dwight Freeney and one more year of James Harrison and these guys through the years where we say you could just bring them in for 1 year and they could still play late into their career. Calais Campbell, I think, is in that boat right now.
Yeah, look, I mean, Calais Campbell, anytime I could get him for a year, I'm in. There's a free roster spot for Calais Campbell on my team until the man decides he wants to retire. That's just an in perpetuity type of deal. There's a ton of guys though I think that would be interesting again as just parts of your rotation, assuming the price isn't nuts. There's a lot of these guys who I think the value at this point must have gone down to the point where you'd want to do it. Like Chase Young at this stage, I mean, he was okay this season, pretty solid. Maybe not a bounce back, but like the best we've seen from him in a while. Is Chase Young's value now sufficiently diminished that you just want to bring him in as part of your rotation and keep him there?
He's a 1 year guy.
Constant rolling the dice on it. Marcus Davenport is the new Jason Verrett. Constantly 1 year deal for Marcus Davenport. Maybe he'll be healthy 1 year and you'll get high end play out of him. But like, there's a ton of those guys who, like, I would kick the tires on as part of a rotation. Dietrich Wise, you'd bring in for that kind of rotation body as well. Like, there's a lot of those guys.
Yeah, completely agree. I'll take every year. I've liked the Marcus Davenport signings the last couple of years, and they have not worked out whatsoever. Lions took the 1 year flyer on him. Vikings took the 1 year flyer on him. Not great.
What about
I'd do it again.
Right. What about Hassan Reddick, based off the disaster that was that both sides of that deal, essentially the Reddick for Bryce Huff, not a trade, but like swappity do.
That feels like one where how did it end did it end sour in Philly before he went to the Jets, or did it just
I don't think it ended particularly sour. Remember. They just decided,
right, they just moved on, brought in Bryce Huff. It just didn't work. What if Philly just gets him for like super cheap? It's like, we'll just bring him back. That feels like a move that they would pull off, right? Everyone's kind of upset with Reddick and the way things went with the Jets, and he kind of screwed them over and all this, and the Eagles just kind of get him on the cheap and bring him back in.
Well, that's the thing. Like, what's his value? Like, did he torpedo because his whole thing is like he wanted a new contract. He wanted, to get paid again. The Jets were like, not why would we do that? And he was like, well, okay, then I'll sit out. And then eventually, fired his agent. Was it Rosenhaus convinced him to be like, dude, the only way out of this is to actually show up for work. So he came back and, it wasn't exactly a huge factor, but at least showed up for work again. But like, did that completely ruin any value he has, or can he actually get paid again?
No, I think his value's tanked because he demanded a trade, or asked for a trade out of Philly, gets to the Jets, doesn't even sign his contract, barely plays, wants to get paid. I think his value's absolutely tanked. So I don't know if he's willing to be a buy low. The chat asked about Javon Kinlaw. That was one name I was going to mention as well. I've been, former first round pick. I've been disappointed at him against the run. Like, just don't want him out there playing the run, can't anchor. I mean, he's basically a liability. I like him as a pass rush specialist, though. I think he could, he had a decent year last year rushing the passer. I think he's, again, we're talking players as part of the rotation. I would take the 1 year flyer on Kinlaw as well, that type of player.
And then again, cut candidates, trade candidates, like the other side of that Hassan Reddick swappity do. Bryce Huff was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl after being the big free agent acquisition. That screams this is not a guy that's long for this team. I mean, Bryce Huff, for the last couple of years, was literally the most efficient situational pass rusher in all of football for that Jets defense. There's no way that just evaporated. Like, he didn't just become a garbage player overnight. If I had a hole as a situational pass rusher, I would absolutely be interested in bringing Bryce Huff in and seeing if he can fill that role for me.
I would say the light version of that is Josh Uche. Remember the Chiefs traded for him, which looked like a shrewd move, right? Add him to the rotation. He barely played for the Chiefs or had an impact. He has not been as impactful as Huff through his career, but he's shown enough flashes that, again, you get him into camp and see what happens. I'm with you on Huff, though. Love that as a potential buy low option. All right, let's go to linebacker here, Sam. Never really talk about linebackers in free agency. The big name, though, Zach Bond, right? You bring in a Zach Bond, and he plays at an all-pro level, has an interception in the Super Bowl. last year during free agency. There's no way we were like, oh yeah, Zach Bond, the most impactful free agent. He really was, legitimately was one of the most, if not the most, impactful free agents that wasn't a quarterback last year. So he's at 9 on 33rd team's list. Ernest Jones moved to a couple different teams last year, right? Traded from the Rams, Seahawks, Titans, and Seahawks. He's at 16, and then Nick Bolton at 30. I think Bolton's taken a bit of a hit the last couple of years. Some of his limitations athletically seem to show up, but Zach Bond all of a sudden becomes this hot name at linebacker.
But he's also the classic example of a guy that's just never going to hit the market, right? Like there's no way the Eagles can let him walk after the season that he just had. He's going to get kept in the building, whether it's by an extension or a franchise tag.
I would say probably, yeah. I think they probably will. Remember, in the 2022 season, I was like, the Eagles moves, right? Every year you have these moves that Howie Roseman makes that you just like, how can he do this again? For me, 2 years ago, it was the James Bradbury move in 2022. They needed a corner. They didn't draft one. They didn't have a starter. And they got Bradbury after the draft, didn't lose a comp pick for it, got him really cheap, played a great season on the way to the Super Bowl. And then the Zach Bond move. It's like, all right, we as an organization, Philadelphia doesn't overspend at linebacker, at safety, at running back, at the lower value positions. That's what they do. And so you get Zach Bond on the cheap, and he ends up playing at an all-pro level. So that's the one thing that might keep me from saying, hey, they know not, they'll just go on to the next shrewd move, right? What's the next thing that they can do? Maybe this year it's stealing a replacement for Mekhi Becton at right guard. Maybe this year it's what they do on the defensive line to maybe have to replace a Josh Sweat and a Milton Williams. So I don't know if they end up paying Bond, but this obviously was a great move by Philadelphia, and it's increased Bond's value to the point where whether it's Philly or somewhere else, he is probably going to get paid.
But critically, like coming off that James Bradbury season, they then paid him, right? Like that was a move that might have made sense to get the 1 year out of Bradbury and then move on, go in a different direction, try and find the next bargain. But instead, they were like, "No, he was so good for us. We want to reward that. We'll give him the contract. We'll do it up again." And it didn't work out. I would be surprised. I'd be shocked actually if coming off this season, Bond Super Bowl interception, blah blah blah, like defensive player of the year candidate, all pro. I don't see how you can let that guy leave, whether it's long-term deal or franchise tag. Like, I just do not see him hitting the market.
Dre Greenlaw, I believe, hits free agency with a void in his contract at 28 years old. I think he needs to be mentioned. Him and Fred Warner is a 1-2 punch, probably the best 1-2 punch in the NFL when they've both been healthy. Greenlaw is that Energizer Bunny type on that side of the ball that just kind of like, culture changer on defense. I think Greenlaw is going to get a lot of attention as well.
Yeah. Greenlaw has been, guy came back from that Achilles injury and racked up like 10 tackles in the first half in his debut back in his return. Like that guy is an impact playmaker on the defense.
By the way, Bond was making $3.5 million this year. $3.5 million. I can't like look up and down this list and say, I'm looking at the free agents. Like Devin Bush will be that guy next year, right? I would take a shot on Devin Bush. Browns, he showed some flashes this year for Cleveland, but I don't know that there's no like next Zach Bond, I don't think, in this group. So don't even try that one. Other name to mention is Bobby Wagner once again, right? I think in Washington's case, I don't know if they bring him back for one more year once again. Wagner has his limitations. That's why he ended up moving on from both the Rams, then Seattle, and still limitations, but he could still play, right? And man, if you have a linebacker need, the 1 year stopgap and help elevate everybody around him, Bobby Wagner, I think, still has it.
That class, Levante David as well, whatever draft class that is, are still cooking. Like, okay, Wagner at least has had he's had the decency to at 35 years old slow down, whereas Levante David still looks really good. Like he's still able to run with tight ends and running backs and do whatever he needs to. Levante David's still an amazing player.
I'm not even going to mention his name. I just assume he's back in Tampa Bay. I just assume they'll figure it out. Buck for life, 35 years old. They're both 35, but I think David goes back to Tampa Bay.
That would be fascinating, though. Like, if eventually the Bucks decide, okay, now's the time we need to get out. Like, it's come. Like, I would absolutely always sign. Like, Normally the ethos is better to be a year too early than a year too late. I'm okay being a year too late on Levante David if I'm another team. Like I'm just going to sign the second the Bucks are like, okay, thanks but no thanks, we're going to move on. I would immediately sign Levante David for my defense if I'm somebody else, just to see that one final year. Let's see if he still has it, and then let's go again.
Linebacker is also an interesting position. I think you could say this for both Wagner and David. They're not what they were 3 or 4 years ago. Fair statement. But they're still good enough, right? And at linebacker, then it's tricky because it's like most of the time where the issues show up is when, hey, you get isolated on a really athletic running back, like, hey, go cover Jahmyr Gibbs. And
Right.
you mentioned, hey, David's still tracking down Lamar Jackson, in the flat and all that. But over time, you don't want them doing that as much, but you can still get production out of them. I think you could still get a lot of good production out of Levante David and Bobby Wagner without, and so then you don't have to break the bank at other, on other younger linebackers
It's also
while
so
you're
much.
looking at the draft.
It's so dependent on like what you're asking them to do, right? So
It
maybe
is.
when you're bringing in a guy like that, he's not like previously at his peak. You could ask Levante David to do anything, and he'd be good at it. Now it's like, well, maybe we don't want him doing certain things, but we can still like he could still be really good if we protect him a little bit. Like we don't have to completely shelter him from playing defense, but if we just keep him away from a couple of things that he maybe can't handle now but could at his best, then we're good.
All right, let's go to the secondary. We'll kind of combine corners and safeties here as we wrap it up. Javon Holland's the top. Hey, do you have something?
Just finally, the one
No.
name, Robert Spillane, the guy you can build a whole defense around if you're so inclined for the Raiders, is an upcoming free agent. I mean, joking aside, like that's a pretty good linebacker, Robert Spillane. It sounded
Yeah,
crazy when they were talking about building a whole defense around him, but he's a pretty good player.
I like Spillane as well. And a Landon Roberts, similar. Just goal line. If you need a goal line linebacker, a Landon Roberts is out there. Classic Steelers player. All right, let's go to the secondary. Javon Holland's the top defensive back at number 4 on 33rd team's list. DJ Reed at number 5. Travarius Ward at number 11. Some good names, I think, on this group of defensive backs. Both, Reed and Ward, recent starters at corner. Those guys are tough to come by. Both, free agents just a couple years ago. I think the Jets and Niners are both happy with what they got out of both of those players. Ward in particular was a big part of their 2022 Super Bowl run, or 2023 Super Bowl run, I should say. And Carlton Davis is another name to mention. He had just the Lions traded a 3 for him just for the 1-year flyer. Ends up getting hurt down the stretch, but he was playing pretty well this year. So I think there's some names in the secondary in the free agent list.
Yeah, actually, I think the secondary might be the strongest part of this free agent class. We mentioned that for defensive line earlier, but there's a lot of capable DBs in this group, even beyond the ones you've already mentioned. Guys like Byron Murphy, who was kind of like a bit up and down, but that guy's made some significant plays for that Minnesota Vikings secondary. The Vikings, I think, have a couple of safeties that are free agents. You've got the ageless Harrison Smith, but also Cameron Bynum, more importantly, because he's younger, like in his prime. Like there's a lot of DBs, I think, that are absolute capable starters in this group.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is a good spot. Trayvon Merrick from the Raiders. He's played free, he's played strong, he's moved around a little bit. Elijah Molden was having a decent season with the Chargers before he got hurt playing safety. I was a big Elijah Molden fan. Jeremy Chin, has been a movable, linebacker safety hybrid. Remember the Washington, this is a lot of the Commanders 1-year guys, right? Jeremy Chin, Bobby Wagner helped. The defense wasn't great, but those guys played some pretty key pieces there. Then you have a guy like Justin Simmons coming off of a not so great season. He looked good early. He had an interception of Patrick Mahomes back in week 3, kind of fell off after that. Don't know what to do with some of those older safeties. Plus you have the safety market. Remember, so many Kevin Byard, Justin Simmons, so many of these starting caliber safeties hitting the market, just not getting paid and then getting scooped up as starters later. I don't know if you're going to see a ton of money floating around at safety, but corner, I think some of these guys could still command a lot of money. I think Rasul Douglas, throw him in there, he's been good for Buffalo.
Safety is almost the opposite problem to the defensive tackles. Like he speculated the money's got to go somewhere, and a guy like Milton Williams may end up getting paid huge money because of it. Like there's so many safeties available in this free agent group that I think you could bring in as just immediate starters, good level starters that are in the right, in their prime, like mid to late 20s, that I just don't see why you would give one of them, top of the market money, like move on to the next guy, right? So the ones we've already mentioned, but you've also got like, where as I look at, you've also got guys like Talanoa Hufanga, remember, who had that insane start
Yeah.
to his career and was getting Troy Polamalu comps, and then okay, that cooled off once we saw him play for a little bit longer. But you've got a ton of those guys. Javon Holland, I think, is a superstar at 25, but like, where's the name that I'm looking for that Julian Blackman. So Julian Blackman is a guy that's played at high level play in the past, is still only 27, and okay, maybe he's been a bit up and down, but like there's so many names that you would look at and say we are 100% comfortable with this guy as like one of our two starting safeties without having to pay him monster money.
Yeah, that's where I think the guys like Merrick, Chin's kind of unique at safety. Blackman, who you mentioned, Cameron Bynum, those guys can all start. Justin Reed for the Chiefs, he's been a key part of their defense. I mean, you're right. I think there's plenty of starting caliber safeties. If you're a safety needy team, I suggest second wave here. And we also know that's a position that's been a lot of cuts the last couple of years, right? Because again, the market's just not wanting to pay them right now. And anyone else at corner that kind of that stands out to you, Sam?
Yeah, Hobbs for the Raiders. Like he's a guy that I think in the
Nate.
slot, in the right type of defense, I think he's a very sort of scheme specific player, or role specific player. But if you have that role available, I don't know that you're going to find a better player than Nate Hobbs to fill it.
Yeah, I think there's some decent names there. Travarius Ward's the one, he's near the top. That is interesting to me. I think he could play, if you're talking press man, and I know we talk about the league going to zone more, but that doesn't mean you're always playing off. It means you could still be isolated on one side and everything. Ward is one of the better press man corners in the NFL. So I think if that's where you're going, you want that type of versatility, you want a Travarius Ward. Rasul Douglas, I thought, was a really nice fit for Buffalo because they do play less press. They're playing more off coverage, eyes on the quarterback. I think he could still do that at a high level. So again, when we talk corners, especially in the draft or free agency, we're talking scheme a lot and fit, and I think that's what determines a whole bunch of where some of these guys go. So press man corner, I think Ward can still do it. Off coverage, I think Rasul Douglas, even at his age, worth bringing him in for a year or two.
There's a ton of sort of the guys that are like former names that are in and around the 30 years old mark that maybe if you're desperate enough, like the Vikings were this year, for example, you might bring a couple of them in. And actually, two of them are from the Vikings. You had Stephon Gilmore, who was a wildly diminished version of what he used to be, but could still play enough, to get by. Shaquille Griffin, again from the Vikings, who was a starter for them all the way through the year. Adoree Jackson is in that kind of world as well. Like a lot of these guys who have been starters for an extended period and are now like 30 plus years of age, but might be an option if you get desperate enough.
I still wouldn't quit Adoree Jackson. Just keeping it, add him to the list of players I would bring in every year just to see if he still got it.
In terms of the like in their prime type of guys, Asante Samuel Jr., 26 years old, like that. This is his second contract, right? Like the big payday theoretically, but coming off a season in which he was injured, like hasn't necessarily been consistently the player that he was supposed to be. But like that guy's got a lot of talent still. Is a great, has good ball skills, like has good break on the ball, quickness. Smaller than you would like he's working from a deficit in some terms, but I'd absolutely kick the tires on an Asante Samuel.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, again, when you're looking at the free agent list, it's mostly you see a lot of 29, 30, 31 year. When you see the 26-year-olds stand out, including Jeff Okudah, by the way, is only 26. But Samuel in particular, right? It's that second round pick, played his 4 years, mostly at a good, solid level. That guy probably gets paid second contract. Okuda is going to continue to bounce around the league as the former number 3 overall pick, right? Reclamation.
Yeah, I mean all
project,
those
and see
guys.
what you can
So
get.
just
Yeah.
in this group, you've got all these former first round cast-offs at this point, right? You've got Akuda, CJ Henderson is a free agent in this group as well. Same idea, is already on to multiple teams. Eric Stokes is a free agent as well. Okay, he hasn't bounced around multiple teams, but the Packers are essentially saying, all right, that first season was really impressive, but not so much since then. Bye bye. So you've got a whole bunch of these former first round guys that are scheduled to hit free agents that just have not worked out so far in the NFL, which are always interesting because, new personnel guys are in charge every year. And if those guys happen to really like those guys at draft time, it's only human nature to say, well, let's see if it was an environment problem in the last 2 or 3 teams he's been playing with. Maybe they were the problem, not him.
So as we said at the top, the headline names are not there when it comes to free agency. But as we've also said, there's second, third tier names. There's shrewd ways to handle this. We know that every year there'll be some flashy stuff going on, but that's not always the stuff that ends up winning championships. So there's still a lot to keep an eye on. I think if you're a fan and your team has players to attack in free agency, and then keeping an eye on the waiver wire and everything else that's going on.
Particularly on defense, there's a lot of useful players that can come in and start and be part of your defense, and for modest money. The interesting dynamic is there's so much money to spend. Like there's so much cap space available for teams to actually go pursuing free agents, but it doesn't have the name. So does that mean the market for this mid tier of player just gets inflated? Does that mean teams are still going to be sitting on a boatload of cap space? Like I'm just fascinated by how this is going to work in terms of spending ability versus players available.
All right, Sam, we're gonna wrap it up here in a few minutes, and so check the chat, see what we're doing. We got a couple superlatives, there we'll be keeping an eye on here in free agency. But first, Check the Mic is brought to you by our friends over at Timeline. Get 10% off your order of MitoPure at timeline.com/checkthemic. MitoPure is a supplement that can help you because it encourages cellular renewal. It works by promoting an essential cellular cleanup process that clears out dysfunctional mitochondria, aka your cell's battery packs. There are no supplements on the market that have better clinical research shown to be effective at targeting the effects of age-related cellular decline. With regular use, you'll see and feel the difference in the form of improved energy levels, better workouts, faster recovery, more endurance, and more. In fact, MitoPure is shown to deliver double-digit increases in muscle strength and endurance without a change in exercise. This is your year to be your best, most energized, most revitalized, so you awaken the strength, power, and resilience already in you with the first and only supplement clinically proven to rejuvenate health at the cellular level. Again, Timeline is offering 10% off your order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com/checkthemic. That's timeline.com/checkthemic. TIMELINE. Timeline.com/checkthemic. All right, Sam, couple questions here for social media as well. The player in free agency that you would overpay is who? Who would you overpay for?
Well, obviously, I wouldn't overpay for anybody if I was a GM. But if
No,
I had to
same.
for one of these guys, I would throw a lot of money at Javon Holland, the Miami Dolphins safety. I think that guy is capable of doing everything I need him to do at any safety position, which is not a given for all of these guys. He can play deep. He can play at the line of scrimmage. He can be that jack of all trades role. I think he's scheme diverse, can play in any defense, can be a tone setter. I think that guy's a star player.
I like it. I love the versatility of Javon Holland. Done it across multiple systems. I think there's a lot to like there. The player I'd overpay, again, I would never overpay. Just like you, man. Market value only. But I'm going to go Ronnie Stanley at left tackle. I think I'm not overreacting to the Chiefs Super Bowl, but I think the value of having that pass protecting left tackle, and despite some injury concerns over the last couple of years, despite some of maybe the drop off from where he was a couple of years ago, I'm going to try to chase that. I'm going to try to chase the upside that he showed a few years ago. I think Ronnie Stanley, solid run blocker, very good pass protector, and the market is tight on legit pass protecting left tackles. There's just not enough. And so if one team goes and says, hey, we're gonna pay a market value plus for Ronnie Stanley. I'm for it because who else are you gonna get? The draft isn't great at tackle compared to previous years. The rest of the free agent class isn't great relative to Ronnie Stanley. So I think of all the free agent tackles that has actual star potential, Ronnie Stanley's that guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, he's the guy out there that's already shown he can play at like an all-pro level at left tackle. Nobody else has done that.
All right, let's go the other way. The player you would not overpay for in free agency.
It's the obvious one, but I'm not giving Sam Darnold crazy money based off the total collapse from the end of last season. Like that scares me too much. I don't care how desperate I am for quarterback. I just saw this guy in the two biggest games of his season absolutely melt down, nuclear reactor level, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl catastrophe, and revert all the way back to like rookie New York Jets Sam Darnold. I can't trust that man with 40, 50, whatever $1,000,000. I'm not doing it.
It's wild. You forgot the 14 wins that
I didn't
even
forget
got
him.
you.
I just saw them erased in one foul swoop.
Somebody's going to look at the 14 wins and say, I'll overpay for that. We'll forget about those last 2 weeks. All right, for me, I'm going to go Stephon Diggs. And again, in this free agent class, Diggs is going to rank high. On all the rankings, he's probably going to rank high. He's coming off the torn ACL. But even before that, we're talking about a sour, bitter ending in Buffalo in 2023 in a Texans team. I know we only got to see Diggs through October, but he was supposed to be one of those missing pieces to complement Nico Collins and Tank Dell. And yeah, there were some other injuries, but the Texans offense didn't look good all season relative to expectations. And part of that was when Diggs was out there, they were not good relative to expectations. So I don't think he's elevated Buffalo. I don't think he's elevated Houston. And as talented as he is, I think he can still move and run routes well and get open. And I'm just not going to do it. And I would have done this 3 years ago. I would have said Stephon Diggs is a game changer. Need him on my team. I think he was a big part of what helped elevate Josh Allen to that superstar status. I think he was a huge part of Josh Allen's development, but I don't think he'll be the part of the next quarterback's development. So I'm not going to overpay for Stephon Diggs in free agency.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
All right, let's head to teams here. Let's wrap it up with this. Team you're most interested to see what they do this offseason and in free agency.
I'm most interested in the Raiders. New regime, right? You've got Tom Brady sticking his oar in as an owner. You've got Pete Carroll coming in there at 80 million years old. And the last time he took over a franchise, it was like endless moves. Like they just brought in so many players. So I think the Raiders are one of the most interesting teams this year because you're going to get still no answer at quarterback yet. What do they do at quarterback, the most important position? And then simply like the volume of moves that they may take will be fascinating. I mean, it could look like Washington from a year ago where going into last season, we were like, this team has changed everything. New front office, new head coach, new everybody. They've made so many moves, new quarterback. And it gave them this incredibly broad range of outcomes of which they hit some of the highest, right? They end up in the NFC Championship game. I think the Raiders are going to be a similar thing. They're going to change everything this offseason, and that's going to make them a team that could be a disaster or could be really good out of nowhere.
Yeah, I do wonder if it is a complete reset year for the Raiders. If it is like what we're going to keep referencing Pete Carroll's 2010 in Seattle, where they made the most transactions in like NFL history just to get the right people in the building. And that's only significant because within 2 years, they had the Legion of Boom. Within 3 years, they were winning a Super Bowl. Like that 1 year reset for Seattle when Carroll got there with John Schneider was massive. And I'm curious to see if that they got Chip Kelly in the building. They have all these big names in the building. I'm going to say my most interesting team is the Patriots. And usually when I'm asked this question, I go with a rookie quarterback contract, right? How does the team build around the rookie quarterback? And you have Drake May, who showed all sorts of potential in year one, but you also saw all of the limitations of the roster around them. And I don't think New England solves their roster in one year. The offensive line may be the worst in the NFL. The pass catchers, worst 1 or 2 groups in the NFL. That's tough to overcome. So how did they solve this thing? By the way, the defense wasn't great either. They need pass rushers. They need pretty much everything. So how do they attack this offseason? Remember Belichick's first year out from under the cap issues that Tom Brady left. they went nuts and kind of overpaid mid-tier type of free agents. Is that where New England is right now? Are they at the spot where it's actually tough to attract? It's like the early 90s. It's actually tough to attract people up there. So they have to overpay people just to get them in the building, or will Drake May, help actually attract some talent to New England, because they need a lot on both sides of the ball. So interested to see how they attack this offseason.
Yep, makes sense.
All right, man, I'm going to wrap it up with this one. As a former professional athlete, I care about what I put in my body, especially when it comes to protein. That's why we're pumped to be sponsored by Orgain. Orgain believes real nutrition has the power to make a real difference in people's lives. Orgain's new 30-gram complete protein shakes offer protein-packed real nutrition designed to satisfy your cravings without any added sugar. Plus, they're an excellent source of premium, ultra-filtered protein with all 9 essential amino acids. Orgain's products are handcrafted with high-quality ingredients. I'm about to have some. I'm going to go work out right here, because my office is also my gym. So we're going to knock out a workout, grab some vanilla Orgain, and chug it right after. 30 grams of protein right after my workout. It's perfect. Wish I had this when I was still playing. And if you're into more than just the protein powders, they've got bars, they have shakes, they have tons of other nutritional products. Orgain has products that the whole family will love. So there are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain's 30-gram protein shakes a try. Head to Orgain.com/checkthemic and use code checkthemic for 30% off your order. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use the code checkthemic for 30% off. One more time, 30% off. Head to Orgain.com/checkthemic. Use code checkthemic. All right, Sam, I think that was pretty good preview. Did it in an hour and a half. Nice tight show for us.
Beautiful.
And previewed everything. And here's the thing. We don't actually know what's going to happen. We don't know who's getting released. There's always surprise cuts. There's always surprise trade rumors. There's trade rumors that you should ignore, like the Trevor Lawrence one, as I said earlier. But yeah, there's going to be a lot happening over these next few weeks. And as I said yesterday too, it is off-season schedule time. Monday mornings are going to move to 9 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. So we'll be live Monday morning at 9 a.m. We're in mock draft Monday season. So we're going to do some sort of mock drafting probably every Monday between now and April 4th or whatever that Monday is of that week. Mock draft Monday coming up this Monday at 9, and then we're here live 10:30 Wednesday morning, Thursday morning. And then who knows when we're going to go live, when breaking news happens. We could do it all. We're all doing it from our house here, right? We're doing it from home because the studio is being built. The new Check the Mic studio being built, hopefully in there as soon as possible. We're hoping before the draft, though. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're not going anywhere in the offseason. That's some of our busiest stuff because we have all this free agent content. We have all this draft content. And we have the flexibility now to do it whenever we want, given that we are at home and we're not relying on a studio. But yes, coming up in the next few months, we're going to have our own fancy Check the Mic studio. We're not going to be tenants in anybody else's.
Right, just tenants in our own home right now, and then off to the studio. So, all right, thanks to everybody for tuning in. Appreciate it, and we'll see you again Monday morning, 9 a.m. with more Check the Mic.